it's clear to me that Paul knew that he was going to die soon. Now, tradition, the Bible doesn't tell us, but tradition tells us that he eventually went before Nero and that Nero had him beheaded in Rome. And so Paul knows that he has a death sentence hanging over him. And his words, we might call them his dying words, if you will, is, I'm now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. It's curious to me that he sees his death as a sacrifice. Notice he said, I'm ready to be offered. And as our brother prayed, this is what many of our countrymen and women have done through the years, is they have sacrificed everything for the freedom of their countrymen. And it's good to think about these things. But this weekend is really a holiday that remembers and concentrates on death. Now, death is not something that we like to consider. I don't know if you realize it or not, but I have seen a trend through the years. Since I was a teenager, well, since before that, it seemed that I was very much accustomed to going to funerals. You know, my dad had a very big family, and when you have a big family and you live in a small town, you end up going to a lot of funerals. And folks around here say Berkeley Springs is a small town. Well, Berkeley Springs looks like the big city to me, where I came from. And consequently, we were all living in a very farming community, and most of them were related. If there was 140 people in the town, there was only about 14 last names. So I got very accustomed to going to funerals when I was young. Parents had a different view of it back then. They just took their kids along with them. Well, that has kind of changed now, especially this younger generation. Many of the younger generation that I meet have never been to a funeral, and many of them simply tell me, we're not going to have one. Have you noticed a lot of funerals lately that don't exist? Someone will simply die, and there is no funeral. There's no viewing. Occasionally, there's a celebration of life or a memorial service. The reason for that, I believe, is because people are not accustomed to funerals any longer, and this new generation coming up maybe doesn't understand the value of remembering. And I know that it's hard, but it exists. And when we consider dying men and women who have sacrificed everything, the Bible certainly has a great deal to say about these types of things. You know, the words of dying men are usually the longest remembered. Again, this is sort of passed from our conscience here in America. We do not any longer gather together last words or dying words. It was a common thread in most papers in America to publish the dying words of men and women. I've told you before, and I've had a couple sermons on these type of things. Back here in my office, I got about 4 or 5 books on dying words of dying men. And the reason we're interested in them is because those words seem to be spoken in truth, if there's ever a word spoken in truth. And certainly they're no doubt some of the most sincere words that are spoken in someone's life. So it's not so much a curious thing that people are interested in what he said at the end. And when you read about these people, there's a lot of kind of haunting words. And they make for interesting material. Whether they're entertaining or not, I'm not certain, but they certainly are interesting. Elvis Presley, his last words were, I won't. It's the last thing he said. And it was in respect to his fiancee, Ginger Alden, telling him not to fall asleep in the bathroom. Not very profound, is it, for the king of rock and roll? Albert Einstein said, I have done my share. It's time to go. I will do it elegantly. And then he mumbled something else, but it was in German, and the caretaker that was there didn't know German. You know what Frank Sinatra said? You know, Frank Sinatra, who sang, I Did It My Way. His last words were, "I'm losing." James Brown, he suffered from congestive heart failure, and according to TV Guide, he managed to gasp the words, "I'm going away tonight." John Belushi, who died of a drug overdose, said, "Just don't leave me alone." And his protege, Chris Farley, another Saturday Night Live character, when he died of the same thing, an overdose, he said to the woman that was with him, "Don't leave me." And I think the most entertaining of all of these is from Groucho Marx. How many of you remember Groucho Marx? You know what his last words were? And try not to laugh. It's such a macabre thing to think about, but it is humorous. He left us a joke, even at the very end. As he was dying, he said, in a fashion that only Groucho could, as he was dying, he said, "This is no way to live." I think I've used the illustration here. When speaking of the end, I was so impressed when I was a teenager with a commercial for a new type of pizza. But there's these two cowboys, and they both got their 6-shooters out, and it's high noon. And the one guy is saying to the other, "What do you want on your tombstone?" And this fella's kind of shaken. He thinks about it for a moment, and finally he says, "Pepperoni and cheese." And of course, the particular pizza is Tombstone Pizza. But we might ask that this day as we're considering Memorial Day. What do you want on your stone? My daughter Elizabeth is here this morning. And if you had a conversation with her, she would not be able to even begin to tell you the amount of cemeteries that she has been in with me. You might find that strange. I didn't find it strange. Elizabeth's therapist probably does. You'll have to think about that joke. And there's a lot of truth said in jest there, isn't there? But we used to go to cemeteries because I like to read about people, historical figures. And it was nothing for me to get off a roof on Friday evening at 6 o'clock and say to Elizabeth, "Hey, we're going to go find a gravestone, and it might be 6 hours away." I used to come down here all the time from Bellsville, which is a 5-hour drive, 4-hour drive, depending on who's doing the driving, but 5 hours to Gettysburg. We used to come down here all the time before I ever knew anything about Berkeley Springs and Antietam. And so we would go and look at cemeteries. It didn't matter who it was. Where I grew up, there was supposedly a witch that was buried in one of those cemeteries, and there's chains on it. And we went there on Halloween night one time. I took my girls, and we heard a crazy scream, and we all took off running for the truck. As I was telling them, there's no such thing as witches. Yet we were hightailing it, right? We all come to the end. This matter of funerals and having them or not having them, wanting to go or not wanting to go, is biblical. The wise man said this: "It is better to go to the house of mourning than it is to go to the house of praise." And it is sort of a bizarre ritual that we have in this country. When you think about it, we don't do anything else like this. We will have a casket. Generally, the casket will be open, although that's changing. And we come down front and pay our respects, which generally means we file through, look at them, and of course, what do we say? "Oh, they look so good." When I hear that, and they see me at the back, and they say, "Hey, preacher, you're looking good," I think, well, in comparison, I suppose I'll take that compliment. But the fact of the matter is, it does a great deal to the person who has lost the loved one. Dying isn't easy. Hank Williams, my favorite country singer, said, "None of us are going to make it out of here alive." Barring that Jesus comes back again, his words are certainly true. And as we inch closer to death, we might begin to wonder, how are we going to be remembered? Those that are in the service, it's always been curious to me, things that they talked about as they inched closer to death. My great-great-grandfather, Jackson Montclair Hetrick, who fought down here at Gettysburg, and I think we've hit about every battlefield he's been in. Steve, my girls and I did the Overland Campaign last month. They're so excited. We go to Fredericksburg, and it's like, are we done here now? Yeah, we're going to go to the next one. But as he was dying, my grandfather was born in 1908. And his dad was old when they had him. And it's curious, he remembers taking care of his grandfather from the Civil War. And he would tell me, he said, I had to sit upstairs with the old man, is what he called him. And he'd say, as he was dying, and he'd say he'd wake up and yell, "Charge!" And my grandfather would tell me that story. It was interesting that my grandfather, I was one link away from Civil War veterans, because they used to have kids till they were up in their 50s or 60s back then. So we weren't really that far removed. But he'd yell, "Charge!" I think of I just was reading about General Lee again. There was a new book that came out. Well, new. It came out a few years ago, but I don't buy them new. I wait till they're about 10 years old, and I look for them in the bargain bin. But I just was reading this book. General Lee, his last words, he was thinking of A.P. Hill. And his last words as he lay dying there was, he called up A.P. Hill, and his last words were, "Strike the tents." Well, what does it mean to strike the tent? You know what it means? Well, get ready, we're moving. Of course, they all would be in tents along the battlefield. And here Lee's last thoughts go back to that battlefield. And I think that's probably very common. But Paul's last thoughts, what did they go to? Nero had sentenced him to death. 3 of his friends had left him. In 2 Timothy 4:10, he says, "For Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. Crescens to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia." Here he is, he's alone now, with nothing but his thoughts. At least he has pen and paper. And he says, "I fought the good fight." He's remembering his life, his Christian walk. I've been faithful and untiring in that work, he says. I've finished my course. You see, Paul many times saw life as a sporting event, whether it be boxing or whether it be the Greek Olympics, which I think he refers to a number of times, or whether it be this race of life. He said, I have finished the course. And for Paul, life was a race. I watched the Kentucky Derby, and I think, man, that went by real quick. I think Paul was thinking, it's gone by real quick. And how many of us can amen that? I don't look up now in the bathroom when I'm brushing my teeth. I don't like to, because I've got these super bright lights. I blame Laura for this. These super bright lights, and they're shining down on my super bright bald spots. So I don't even look up, man. I'm down the whole time. That's it. Life is going by. It just seems like the other day that the babies were born. I mean, they're getting out of hand. They're going to be the death of me. He says, I've kept the faith. He'd remained true to God and never wavered in that race. Even when there were things that would hinder him, he pressed on. You hear of racers who talk about they come up to a wall. Well, Paul broke through walls. He just kept his eyes on the goal. And he died as he lived, with his faith and his hope that hinged upon Christ. He says, I'm now ready to be offered. He was fully prepared to meet his Savior. The time of my departure is at hand. And then he says, there is laid up for me a crown. Not one of fading leaves, like the runner would get, of laurels at the end of a race, but one made up of gold. Righteousness and the rewards of God that would be bestowed upon him. Memorial. Paul's life and these passages is a memorial of that. In Luke 16:22, the Bible says, and it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels unto Abraham's bosom, and the rich man also died and was buried. Isn't it curious that the righteous is carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom, and the only eulogy that exists for the rich man is he died and was buried? It reminds me of Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah recalls the year that King Uzziah died. If you go over to the book of Chronicles, I think around verse 26, the only eulogy for Uzziah is he died and was buried. What do you want people to say at your funeral? I'm not one for long dissertations when it comes to me. I don't need anyone to say much good about me. If I had my way, I've told Laura and the girls, just hire me a good fiddler and let him play me out. I don't even need anybody to say anything. The fact of the matter is, that's not a matter of, it's not that I don't care, and it's not that I'm being arrogant. It's just that if I haven't lived a life where people would mourn me, then I certainly don't deserve oratory, to say the least. And the fact of the matter is, I probably don't even deserve a good fiddle tune. But I hope to live my life in such a way that I leave something. And what is that? Well, clearly I'm not going to leave very many physical possessions. But what can I leave? The death of the wicked, many times, is contrasted in the Bible to the death of the righteous. God said to one wicked man, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. The wicked man is called a fool in the Bible. And you remember, the Bible says, call no man a fool. And yet here the wicked man is a fool. Why is he fool? Because he's done foolish things. He hasn't stopped to think about eternity. He hasn't stopped to think about anything beside himself. Death is sudden. Not next year, not next month, not next week, tomorrow. He says this night. Just recently someone died and it shocked me. Why? Because I said, like many other people will say, how many times have you said, I just was talking to him in the store the other day. You just saw him. That night, God required his soul. All that he'd done, this fool, in his life was lost. He had nothing to take with him and nothing in his hand for his future. Another wicked man was killed and buried. Notice it says, it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried, but the rich man also died and was buried. Then we find him in hell. That quick. One of the blessings that we have, I'm not sure how long I've gone. I know many of you told me not to worry about the time, but you don't look like you're asleep yet, so I'll go on a little bit longer. If one of you passes out, I'll stop. If one of you passes out, I'll call 911 for you. Some of the dying testimonies of wicked men have kind of remained in our conscience. Voltaire, from 1788, here's what he said as he died. I am abandoned by God and man. I'll give you half of what I'm worth if you'll give me 6 months of life. This is what he said to his doctor, who told him he couldn't. His response, then I shall go to hell and you go with me, oh Jesus Christ. That's how Voltaire died. Voltaire had said that he was going to wipe out the Bible in his lifetime. What's interesting is his apartment there in France, when he died, it was sold and many people had bought it, and before long, the basement of it was used as a publishing house where they only published one book, and that was the Bible. Isn't that interesting? Charles Churchill, his last words was, what a fool I have been. Now, those words make me shudder. Could you imagine coming to the end and the only thing you could say, what a fool I have been? Hobbes said, I'm about to take a leap into the dark. Leon Gambetti said this, I am lost and there's no use to deny it. Edward Gibbon, the great author who wrote The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. I think I've got that title wrong, but you know who I'm talking about. He says this, all is now lost, finally, irrevocably lost. All is dark and doubtful. And the great philosopher of of the Revolutionary War, Thomas Paine, said, oh Lord, help me. I cannot bear to be left alone. Send even a child to play with me. Many of these words are sad. Many of these words are sad because death was so hard. I know it's strange to talk about death in these terms today, but death is so much easier now. You know what I'm talking about? If you go back not so many decades ago, by the way, you were going to die, and death was no doubt going to be painful. I used to hear my grandfather, the same one who said he was born in 1908, he used to say, if I'm lucky, I'll die in my sleep. I used to think, what a weird thing to say. Well, he grew up in that generation where you sat by your loved one's bed for months as they withered away and died in pain. And I think that's one of the reasons that these generations coming up today, they don't have any concept of death. They don't think about it because they don't have to think about it. You know, when we die today, and I thank the Lord for this, we are so under the influence of the drugs that the doctors give us, we don't have last words anymore. And those of you who have sat by a loved one's bed know the process. It is better to go to the house of mourning than it is to the house of praise. Is it any wonder we've lost the understanding, brother, of what Memorial Day really is? Well, the great poet Tennyson said, mourn for us, he seems the last, remembering all his greatness in the past. Mourn for the man of amplest influence, our greatest yet with least pretense. And as the greatest only are, in his simplicity sublime, such was he whom we deplore. The long self-sacrifice is o'er. Death is not something that's enjoyable to think about. But Paul spoke about it in terms that were encouraging. Did you notice that? He wasn't worried. Some of you have had to face death. Do you know that 3 times in my life, the doctor warned my family that I was at death's doorstep? And I don't look for anything profound from me, because I remember the second time saying, Doc, I feel good. I just ate this lousy Salisbury steak. Imagine if that was my last words. The doctor had to put his head in his hands. He said, if you don't go to Morgantown in the next few hours, you are going to be dead. I thought, okay. They wanted the life flight. I was too cheap for that, so they put me in an ambulance. Worst drive I've ever made in my life. But we got to Morgantown quicker than anything I've ever seen. The doctor didn't even stop to have me sign papers. He ran with, what's that thing they lay you on? What is that? Yeah, the gurney. He ran down there with me, and I'm signing papers, right? And I woke up 3 days later. And there's Laura. Bless her heart. But even then, you don't contemplate it too much. I noticed until you have to deal with losing a loved one, it really doesn't matter as much until then. It's better to go to the house of mourning than it is to the house of praise. It's nice to go to the lake this weekend, but it's also good to remember and pray for your country. We need it. We want to encourage you this morning, if you're not a Christian, to please come as we stand and sing our hymn book.